What does the CEO of a company do? What are his day-to-day activities? There must be some kind of playbook to turn to, regardless of the industry you are in order to bring success to a company, right? The Strategic Business Leader exam is part of the final exams you need to do in order to become an ACCA member. This exam is essentially a playbook for CEOs to manage their company. It doesn't matter if you run an internet startup in the technology sector or a wind farm in the energy sector. You can approach different problems in the same way. The Strategic Business Leader exam provides you with a template to follow that you can pick up at any time, and you will know where to start and run your business. You can see it as a toolbox with different tools that are all useful in different ways, just like a toolbox a handyman would carry around on a job. In this video, we're going to focus on the leadership part of the exam. At the beginning, we're going to listen to an interview with Bob Iger, which is the current CEO of the Disney company. After that, we're going to listen to an interview made on CNBC that talks about leadership failures in the current environment.
Let's take a moment to talk about leadership. And how do you think of the leadership ideal? And then how do you fit your priorities as a CEO into that vision? And maybe also extend it to the personal priorities that you have.
Well, first of all, I think you have to define what a CEO's role is. I believe the CEO has to define what the company is. In our case, we decided we are a content company. We're not a distributor, for instance. We make things. We don't distribute them. There is some distribution, but the primary thrust is creation. A CEO also has to define strategies. I talked about the three primary strategies. There is a fourth, which is diversity, which I'll talk about as it relates to leadership. And then a CEO has to set standards, which essentially is standards for your product and for your people. It's about quality, it's about integrity, and make sure that the company is adhering to those standards. And then lastly, a CEO is the motivator in chief, which I talked about earlier. So by defining what my job is, I think then you have to I have to figure out, okay, what attributes from a leadership perspective will enable me to carry out that job best, and which attributes are those that my leadership team needs to either learn or be the best at in order for the company to continue to flourish. And I named in my speech to my management team last week, I talked about what do you do with a company that is great already, and it is, and I know that I sound conceited when I say that, but if you look at any way the company is to be measured, whether it's admiration, respect, we show up on a lot of lists in that regard as among the most admired in the world, or the bottom line, or just the love that people have of the company and its products, I think we've already achieved a lot. But how do you take a company that has achieved so much and achieve even more? What's the ingredient to being even better at being great? Mm-hmm. And it really comes down to leadership. It comes down to basically a number of attributes that I think enable companies not only to continue to do what they do well, but to continue to improve. And so there are 10 that are on my mind. These are things that I have determined are important from my 40 years of experience in the business and having learned from working for some great people. I've had the luxury of having some great bosses. I see if I can remember all 10. I brought my iPad in case I have to refer to it. I started with optimism. I know that sounds odd, but leaders have to be optimistic. Nobody wants to follow a pessimist. The face that you put on when you face your people needs to be a face that is positive about the future of the company, about their future in the company. You can be skeptical, You can be realistic, but you can't be cynical and you can't be pessimistic. Nobody would follow you otherwise. Leaders also have to be thoughtful. Thoughtfulness is an often underappreciated quality of leadership. What that means is you have to take the time to study. You have to know the subject matter, the facts, the issues that you're dealing with, so that when you render an opinion as a leader or make a decision, it's made based on knowledge. And when you do that, one, I think typically your decision is going to be right. Secondly, it will be listened to, adhered to, respected more. You're not just shooting from the hip or doing something off the cuff. At the same time, you have to be decisive. People hate to work for people who are not decisive. With that, you also have to be focused. People need to know what's important to you, what's important to the company, what are the things they should be focused on. Really important. I believe in being open, honest, even in terms of how you deal with people, accessible. Those all kind of fit into the category of fairness and just how you interact and how you treat people.
We're up to 5, I think.
Curiosity, extremely, I don't think I'll get them all. Curiosity, extremely important. You need to really want to learn about new things. Your company is being challenged, particularly in today's world where change is such a, not only a constant, but it's happening in such pervasive, rapid ways that you've got to be curious. You've got to learn about all the shifting of the plates and et cetera and so on. You must listen to a diversity of opinions, and to do that, you have to surround yourself with a diversity of people. That's really critical.
That's close.
I just mentioned a bunch.
Yeah.
We've had a leadership crisis in this country in business for quite so many years now, and we're starting to see the impact of it sort of showing up right now. Business is an infinite game. There is no finish line. There's no such thing as winning business. But if we listen to the language of too many leaders, they talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition. The problem is there's no agreed upon objectives and there's no agreed upon timeframes. And when we lead with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there's a few very consistent and predictable outcomes: decline of trust, decline of cooperation, and decline of innovation. And we're starting to see all those things play out right now.
But hasn't all of those things always been the case with business, having very competitive CEOs? I mean, what's different now?
Having competitive CEOs is not the issue. It's what's driving the CEOs. A lot of the standard business practices that we consider normal today have not always been the case. For example, shareholder supremacy, where we define the purpose of business is to maximize profit within the bounds of the law, really was only popularized during the 1980s and 1990s. The use of mass layoffs on an annualized basis to balance the books did not exist in the United States prior to the 1980s. And we used to reward and pay senior executives and professional executives based on the performance of the company, not necessarily the performance of the equity. So we're starting to see this sort of focus on the more finite and the more short term that really ramped up and popularized in the 80s and 90s and now is considered normal, and we're seeing some of the problems.
Though I wouldn't say mass layoffs to balance the books is normal today, though there might be some examples of it. Though what you're pointing to anyway is something that came up with the Business Roundtable recently, where they did make an announcement to try and encourage a shift towards more management for stakeholders, not just shareholders. And in fact, earlier today, Jamie Dimon was discussing that. He, of course, was chair of the Business Roundtable at the time they made that announcement. Let's take a listen.
And I do think that we try, and I'm speaking for a lot of companies, try to do a tremendous amount to help the communities, because there have been people left behind. But, the inner city schools are not failing because of banks, okay? And infrastructure is not failing because of banks. So I think we can help build infrastructure, help train people, get work skills, get involved with education systems, like all the kind of stuff that a lot of us all do in Detroit. We can lift up society, and I think it's good for us to lift up society. And, when society does better, everyone does better.
Should all CEOs be thinking as broad as society? I mean, JP Morgan's the biggest bank in the land. It's slightly different kettle of fish. But yes, I can understand a shift from not just shareholders to stakeholders as well, whether that's customers and employees. But should all people be thinking, all managers be thinking as broad as society?
Ultimately, when we prioritize the wants, needs, desires of our employees and our customers, it does benefit society as a ripple. I mean, people who work in places where they like going to work are happier people. Happier people treat their kids better, treat their spouses better. Yes, there is a ripple effect to society, but being purpose-driven, and this is the thing that sort of irked me about the Business Roundtable statement, being purpose-driven doesn't mean giving to charity. It's not your corporate responsibility program. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is taking care of your internal people before you take care of the external people. And I was a little cynical when that statement came out. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it's good that companies are talking about being purpose-driven, but the people they used who signed the letter in the press release, the spokespeople, sort of, you know, you had Johnson & Johnson that just paid a massive fine for their involvement in the opioid crisis, and even Jamie Dimon's company just a few years ago announced record layoffs the exact same year they had record bonuses, which is an interesting correlation. I would have preferred to have seen some of the CEOs or former CEOs like Jim Senegal or Kip Tyndall from Container Store and from Costco, thank you, be better representatives, because they have been stakeholder driven for decades. It's not a recent thing. So, you know, I want to know, are they truly changing the way they're doing business, or are they just responding to public pressure?
And quickly, final question on WeWork. What's your take on that, and whether the sort of failings of that company were really worth some blame for Adam Neumann, or whether he was trying to plan for the long term and that hit issues in the short term?
Well, I enjoy watching them all blame each other, and at the end of the day, they're all to blame. I mean, the board should have been watching more closely at somebody who had sort of seemed to have lost control and sort of was enjoying the trappings of success a little too much. And at the end of the day, Neumann probably also obviously deserves some responsibility there. I think everybody deserves to raise their hand and say, I think we screwed up a little bit.
If you enjoyed this video, you can subscribe and leave a comment and tell us which exams you want us to cover next. And also, if you're currently studying for the ACCA SBL exam, you can check out the description, because we have a full course covering the whole syllabus, and you can check it out in the description. Thank you.